This is Talk the Home of Common Sense for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Keep those calls coming in about the Brexit betrayal. Fascinating to talk to James Ball, Remainer, staunch Remainer. He thinks the deal doesn't go far enough. Oh, dear God, I mean, don't worry. We'll be back in the EU before the end of the Parliament. Mark my words. Anyway, let's talk about somebody who's probably cheering that on as well, because he's a bit of a Remainer as well, wasn't he? Gary Lineker. But I think we should be feeling sorry for Gary Lineker. Not only has he lost his job at the BBC, lost his reputation as a good guy, because, I don't know, putting anti-Semitic stuff online genuinely does do that for you. But he also has lost out on £800,000 payoff from quitting the BBC. I know, we're all going to start a crowdfund for him. And I'm sure one of the contributors will be Rebecca Ryan. She's campaign director at Defund the BBC. Very good morning to you, Rebecca. Are you upset for Gary today?
Not at all. No, bless him. I think he's got enough money in the bank anyway, hasn't he? And it's about time he slung his hook. So yeah, no, happy to see him.
Well, it is interesting because I mean, you want to defund the BBC again. I think there's a lot of things wrong with the BBC. I'd like to keep the BBC going, but just doing a better job and for less money. And I don't want to be sent to prison for not getting a licence fee. But I mean, certainly 1.3 million quid he was on. So I mean, actually, we can defund the BBC a little bit more, can't we?
Absolutely. And I think this is the thing, is that he has been sort of a figure of hate for many of our supporters for a long time. So it's probably a very good thing for the BBC to finally get rid of him. I mean, it's pretty obvious that he was pushed before he jumped, but to have that sort of save, his dignity protected, to say that he's decided to go, then great. But yeah, absolutely. It's a refreshingly strong move from the BBC, and it will be in their favour. But it has taken a long time to get rid of him. It has taken a huge amount of pressure. We've had all of the main Jewish groups applying pressure in mainstream media. We had Danny Cohen, the former chairman of the BBC, and then also BBC employees themselves, Jewish employees, saying,
enough is enough. I still think, I'm honest with you, I still think that actually the reason he's gone is because he's in the interview he did with the BBC's Amal Rajan, where he talked about how you were complicit, you're almost complicit if you don't speak out about Gaza, although apparently he's complicit in every other tragedy in the world and war in the world because he doesn't speak out about those. No concern about any of those children dying, apparently. Not at the hand of Jews, so it's not an issue for him, not complicit. But he also slagged off the new BBC chief of sport for saying no TV experience. I have a funny feeling that slagging off your boss at the BBC might be a bigger crime than putting out anti-Semitic emojis.
Absolutely, and his previous boss, they had a full-on love-in with him, didn't she? So I think that was certainly a major contributing factor to his departure. But yeah, that interview that he did with the Telegraph, I believe, was probably a final nail in the coffin, because he was clearly just doubling down, and he wasn't going to be quiet on this subject. So time for him to go.
Well, he genuinely viewed himself, it's clear, as being, above the fray, that the rules didn't apply to him. There were lots of people within the BBC spoken out publicly, and people spoke to me privately there, like, I'm not allowed to do this. I'm not, I don't work in the political or the news field, but I'm not allowed to speak out on issues that I feel strongly about. But he is. But also, I do think if he spoke out in a different way for different political topics and from a different point of view, he would have been out on his ear much quicker. If he had spoken out in favour of Israel, if he'd spoken out in favour of Brexit, if he'd spoken out in favour of Reform UK or the Tories or anti-mass immigration, or all the things he posed, I mean, I think he'd have been out on his ear years ago. It's just the views he had were acceptable as mainstream views in the BBC.
Absolutely. Very fashionable views in the sort of middle-class avocado-eating dinner party set of London.
Oh, don't talk about my people like that. But that's the truth, isn't it? That he got away with it for so long because they didn't really have a problem with anything he said.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the thing. And he's pushed and he's pushed and he's pushed. But, he's come to the end of the line with the... I don't think you can get away with using those anti-Semitic tropes. And we talked about last week, the flagrant sort of ignorance. Is he an innocent bumbling around in a topic he knows nothing about? Or is he a hugely powerful man, the top paid so-called talent at the BBC, who's given this massive platform? It's dangerous You can't then claim that you weren't aware, and even if you had seen the emoji, that you wouldn't have put two and two together.
But also, if you don't understand the the anti-Semitic tropes, maybe you don't understand enough about the topic, and maybe you shouldn't be retweeting stuff that you don't understand. That would be my top tip on that. Absolutely. Well, we should see. He's lost out 800,000 payoff by basically if he'd been forced to go officially as opposed to resigning. But he's got a load of podcasts. He's got his Walker's sponsorship. Word is he might be going to ITV, so we'll see about that. But again, we're not paying his wages. He doesn't have to agree to the BBC contract about keeping it stum on politics, so that's his business. But there we are. Rebecca Ryan, campaign director at Defund the BBC. Thank you for that. Tom Slater, I imagine you've got a lot of sympathy for Gary losing out 800k because times is hard.
No, exactly. It's not as if he's got a podcast empire to fall back on, and the many millions that he's surely amassed at the taxpayers' expense over the years so far.
Do you think he'll give us a podcast? Because I'm sure he likes lots of alternative viewpoints.
What would we call it? The rest is ... It would have to just,
Yeah.
I dread to think. People can call in and make a suggestion.
Call in, yeah. What will our podcast be? I mean, I want
It fits the format, 'cause it's two people who broadly agree on most things being presented as if they're, completely...
Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell nodding along to each other and getting everything wrong.
Absolutely.
I mean, everything wrong. It's quite mind-blowing how much they can be wrong about things.
Gary Lineker managed to be even more mind-numbing to listen to than those two, so that's a hell of a achievement.
I liked him on football.
No, exactly.
He's good on football.
It's a real tragedy in that sense. It's like, if only he could have kept his mouth shut. Absolutely.